Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday and happy Halloween, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is, of course, October 31st, and as always, we encourage you on this day and any other day to make sure you're up to date on your local weather information. You can easily do that by giving us a call at the Alaska Weather Information Line, 800-472-0391. Our website is always up to date for you there. The latest around the region is a wind advisory for the eastern Alaska range. We'll check on that in just a minute, but if you've been to the website this afternoon, you've seen that. You can also go to weather.gov/Fairbanks/Anchorage or /Juneau to get your localized weather information in that way. And email us anytime, pictures, weather reports. We'd love to see it, and we'd love to share it with the folks on Alaska Weather as well. nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. As always, we like to remind you of our show times on the ARCS system. It's live streaming at 5:30 and KUAC 9.4 in the Fairbanks area as well. 5:30 there. 360 North, you'll see it at 7:30 each night and on Sundays now as well. And Alaska Public Media, you can find us the following morning at 5 o'clock. But don't forget, it's also on YouTube. So if you want to just take that little player, the little slider, and scrub it across, that's what it's called, scrub it over to the right side. You can jump ahead to the marine section a little bit later on in the evening if that's the part that you like the best. Or you just want to check on the sea ice, you can find that anytime there as well. YouTube.com, search for AKwx TV. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation right now. A wind advisory is posted for the eastern Alaska range. Mainly going to be a southerly wind gusting up over the passes and generally west of the Toke Cutoff there. Those gusts could be upwards of 60, 80, even 90 miles per hour in their strongest fashion. That should continue till about noon tomorrow. So watch for those gusty winds to continue through tonight and early tomorrow, generally for the eastern Alaska range and especially the passes there west of the Toke Cutoff again. So windy conditions there in the eastern mountains. As we look at the overall weather picture, it's really the same as it's been for about the last week or so. A pretty powerful area of low pressure across the eastern Bering Sea has been taking over the weather picture. We've got a very stalled, slow-moving area of high pressure across the interior. And what you'll see here, if you look at the jet stream, you could probably almost visualize this just by looking at the clouds, is a very large dip or a trough across the west, and then that upside down U-shaped pattern across most of the continental Alaska region that is quite literally blocking that weather from moving eastward. It's the same pattern that we've seen for a couple different winters now, and that omega block there really slows the progression of weather moving into the interior or across the Gulf until that breaks down. Things don't get a whole lot stormier across the Gulf of Alaska or in southeast, and that does allow the weather to be fairly dry across the interior while very stormy across the western coast and the Aleutians. Here's a look at the weather pattern once again. It looks like our low dropped to about 954 on the barometer earlier today, and so windy conditions continue across the southwestern Capes while a lot of clouds and cold air is trying to amass across the Gulf of Anadyr and dropping southward across the western Bering Sea. It wouldn't be a long shot to see some snow out in the western Aleutians as we get toward the middle to latter part of the week. In the meantime, it has been fairly dry across the interior there. You can see the low clouds breaking up this morning, and most areas have been fairly clear. In fact, a lot of what you're seeing on the satellite picture is the capturing of that very cold temperature, the cold air, as sensed by the infrared satellite picture there. So in this case, a satellite picture is nothing more than a thermometer kind of taking a sample of the atmosphere there, and in the cold spots it's drawing in cloud cover. Well, we know that's not been the case as we've been looking at the observations all day, and most of those areas have been pretty dry. We have been seeing some precipitation across south central Alaska and southwestern Alaska, of course, and along that boundary it has been raining, but temperatures have been cold enough that a lot of that has been freezing on contact in some very light areas, and there was frost on the roads for many in south central earlier this morning. Southeast is enjoying a drier stretch right now, but as this frontal boundary starts creeping to the north and east, as well as a surge of warmer and wetter air moving up the eastern Gulf, we should expect that rain will fill back into your region, something that would probably be a lot more normal than the weather you've been experiencing, especially for the last month. Here's our low pressure system there, 956 the latest count by mid to late afternoon. You can see the front stretching all the way down into the central and southern Gulf, and the front's wrapping all the way around west of the Pribilofs to the eastern chain and just about to the Alaska Peninsula. This will gradually fall apart as it swings a little bit further north and east tonight. Waves of low pressure are working across the Gulf and just north of the Alaska Range with a frontal boundary that's stalled across the coastal plain, locking in the coldest weather across the North Slope, and then allowing that to drain into the lower 48 states and our eastern neighbor of Canada. As we head through tonight, what's left of the front will still be working across the Gulf. Another wave of low pressure will try and spin up here just east of Kodiak Island. You can see the pressure gradients tightening across the coastal areas of southern southeast. You'll see more clouds first for southern southeast than anything else, and then eventually the rain will start to creep in the southern third or so of the panhandle. We'll see the best chance of rainfall, at least in the initial period of the week. As we get into Prince William Sound, periods of light rain and some drizzle are possible there, as well as over the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, and into southwestern Alaska and Bristol Bay. Low pressure is already filling in, and by filling in, that allows that level to come up a little bit more. Remember, the lowest level, when you see low pressure there, it means it's a much stronger system. When it gets a little bit higher, the winds won't be quite as strong, the waves not as high, and the weather should gradually improve as that number comes up. Eventually, if you compare it to another weather system there, it's all kind of relative. So a low would be low compared to the high that we see here at 1,017 millibars. So again, just kind of a sliding scale out across the weather pattern here. Low pressure is wrapping in winds from the north and the west across the central and western Bering. Look for rain across the Pribilofs and the chain as you would expect. Another system's on the southern side trying to work its way into the mix there and get a little bit of attention. A 989 millibar low. Most of the interior tonight should be clear, with high pressure out across western and central Canada at 1,017 millibars. Of course, that is some cold, cold stuff. As we get into Tuesday, look for very little change there. The overall weather pattern will start to kind of splinter off in different pieces. The low that we had associated with the wave working across the eastern Bering and the northern Gulf breaks off, and here's our low pressure system that we were watching to see if it formed, and sure enough it did. 984 millibars there with not really much of a front left anymore, but a little bit more of a wind change and a pressure difference, and that should encourage more rainfall into central and southern parts of southeastern Alaska with periods of light rain there, as well as snow showers across the western Alaska Range. Don't be surprised to see lower visibilities and ceilings in the morning for some of those western passes, and that should gradually improve in some cases as we go through the day, especially for the northern and eastern Alaska Range. And again, the winds will be settling down as we talked about a few minutes ago. Out across the northern and western Bering, a 966 millibar low will be what we're dealing with south of the Gulf of Anadyr. Showers and periods of rain should be expected across most of the Bering, pretty common stuff for early November. As we get into Wednesday, high pressure is dropping southward across the western and southern Yukon into northern British Columbia. Better chance for rainfall across southeast. Look at this, 983 millibar low working its way northward. A little bit more of a surge of warm air trying to work across Haida Gwaii. And as that does so, it'll squeeze out some more steadier rainfall and certainly thicker cloud cover for a large part of southeast. Showers will continue around Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, Cook Inlet, and probably a better chance for a few more snow showers around the Chugach and Kenai Mountains. And a look up north, well, you can't miss that, can you? Cold front dropping into the north slope. And you know it's cold if it's coming out of the north, right? That is some serious cold air trying to work its way southward. Look for a chance for some light snow around the Chukchi coast, around Wainwright and Barrow, and also looking for some light rainfall as you look across the southwestern coast all the way into Norton Sound. A better chance for some snow showers, though, in Nome and all the way down to areas just south of Galena and Huslia, and probably on the western side of the Alaska Range. Meanwhile, we still have a weak wave of low pressure at 984 millibars just off the southwest and Cape Newenham there. Look for a little bit of a push of wet weather into Bristol Bay, so still a little choppy out there. And here's that snow I was talking about. Just enough cold air is wrapped around the western side of that to bring in that mix of rain and snow, or maybe even all snow showers across places like Shemya as we get into Wednesday in early November. Temperatures today, 30s and 40s for most of southeast. We saw some milder readings around Ketchikan, Metlakatla, Craig, and Klawock, all the way into Petersburg, where temps cool down into the 30s. 30s for Haines and Skagway, 41 in the capital city today. Sitka was 48 degrees. Around Prince William Sound, lower to mid 40s on the north and western side. Cordova, though, held on to 48 degrees, 45 in Seward, 45 around Homer as well, 48 for Kenai. Anchorage checked in at 37 around 4 o'clock this afternoon. Around Northway, it was only in the teens as you got close to the Alcan border. Eagle was 25 degrees. Fairbanks was showing 36. And again, a lot of problems with the roads over the weekend and early this morning there. So drive safely if you're in the interior and anywhere on the Alaska road system in the next couple days. 25 the temperature around 4 o'clock in Fort Yukon. And a look to the west shows Tanana was about 36 degrees. 36 for areas in the North Slope. As you move up toward the coast around the Beaufort Seacoast, Wainwright, or Prudhoe Bay, I should say, was about 25 degrees. And then Kaktovik, unfortunately, wasn't reporting late this afternoon. 31 around Barrow. There's Wainwright, around 30 degrees. Kotzebue Sound temperatures in the mid to upper 30s, almost 40, in fact, around Kivalina. It was over 40 in Nome at 41 there. 46 for Unalakleet, 45 for Grayling, and Aniak at 43. McGrath about the same. 41 around Ammonok, and lower 40s for St. Lawrence Island and Gamble. Around the southwestern coast, we saw most areas in the mid-40s there. Into Bristol Bay, Lake Iliamna had 45 degrees there. Was that a sturgeon or not? I don't know. What did you see there? Lower to mid-40s around the Alaska Peninsula. Port Huyton was 43, 45 in St. Paul, and it looks like Atka was 39 degrees with Adak at 43. Shemya not reporting at 4 o'clock. Overnight low temperatures are going to be cold in the interior under a generally clear sky, lower to mid-teens for most cases there. The Middle Tanana Valley and Fairbanks about 19. Northway about 9. Eagle should be around 13 degrees. Those will be some of the coldest spots unless you're looking at Arctic Village, and that'll be about 5. 20 in Kaktovik, Barrow 27. Shishmaref near 33. Nome above freezing in 35. St. Lawrence Island warmer at 40. Southwest looks like most of the YK Delta will be in the lower to mid 30s there. Bristol Bay about 36 to just about freezing as you move inland a little bit. Upper 30s to lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutian Chain. Southeast, expect some cooler spots there under a clear sky for now. Some coastal areas may be close to freezing there as you head southward toward Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock, and the Dixon entrance. Look for lower to mid-30s in many areas. Sitka closer to 41. South Central and the Anchorage area probably just at or above freezing by a degree or two. 37 degrees around Kodiak with a high of 47 tomorrow. 40s and 50s for Southeast as you get into Prince William Sound. Upper 30s to mid-40s tomorrow. Anchorage closer to the upper 30s. 26 around Golkena. Teens and 20s for the upper Tanana Valley. The middle Tanana Valley closer to 30, including Fairbanks. 18 around Fort Yukon. Teens and 20s for the North Slope. Around Barrow, 29 degrees. Kotzebue Sound temperatures in the lower to mid-30s. 37 in Nome, and Southwest in the lower to mid-40s, including Bristol Bay. Looks like Sandpoint about 45 with Dutch Harbor and Unalaska closer to 43 for your Tuesday and the first day of November. Flying weather now. Look for MVFR across southern parts of Southeast. IFR conditions across Portage and into the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula and the western Alaska Range. Hit and miss across the interior. The North Slope, a wide swath of IFR, and most of the west coast looking at grazing or glancing blow of MVFR. But watch what happens in the afternoon. That expands and moves eastward just a little bit more into the outer reaches of Norton Sound. IFR continues around parts of the Kenai Peninsula and the western Alaska Range. MVFR through central and southern parts of Southeast. And IFR continues across the North Slope as you head out of Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. So IFR, especially on the north side, that will be worsening as the day goes on for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. Again, the south side of those passes, though, doesn't look too bad. As you look at Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, it doesn't look like we're going to see a whole lot of change there throughout the day, probably holding at IFR. Rainy Pass should see some improvements toward VFR conditions, and the same goes for Windy Pass we expect for your first day of November tomorrow. Isabel Pass, VFR conditions should develop throughout the day, maybe slowly in the afternoon. Mentasta Pass, we also expect to see a start at MVFR conditions tomorrow. Tanita Pass likely starting at IFR, but again, improvements expected there with VFR conditions by the end of the day. MVFR perhaps in Portage Pass if we're lucky, and Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to see VFR developing in the afternoon. On to freezing levels, well, the surface freezing line is pretty much southward across the Alaska Range and into southeast, but you can see some elevated areas of warm air above 2, even 4,000 feet across the central and western interior and the North Slope. Levels from 2 to 4,000 feet across southeastern Alaska, and cold stuff out across the west. Levels below 2,000 feet for the central and western chain. Icing potential is certainly there. Watch for occasional to widespread moderate across parts of southeast and south central Alaska tomorrow. Most of the interior should be generally free and clear of any widespread significant icing. Southwest, you're flirting with light to isolated moderate there, all the way from Mamaroneck southward into the Bristol Bay region. Here's a jet stream, and here's our cutoff area of high pressure there. This is keeping that dry and very stable air right across the interior. Meanwhile, the storm track taking well south of Alaska and then trying to bring up some moisture into southern parts of southeast. So until this jogs just a little bit there, we won't have anything significant rolling through central or northern parts of Alaska for now, but colder air is trying to make a comeback. Here's a look at southeast, and you can see that broad southeasterly flow across the Panhandle, 10 to 20 knots there. Your ridge of high pressure showing up at the 9,000 foot level there with those westerlies. Light winds coming in across Bristol Bay and then picking up as they move across the YK Delta. Southeasterlies there, 30 to 40 knots moving across the Seward Peninsula, and west and northwesterlies moving across the central and western chain. A very similar pattern at 3,000 feet. Light winds across Bristol Bay, 15, and once you get into the interior, 30 to 40 knots west of the Alaska Range. So a little bit of chop here across the western range and across the northern and eastern Gulf. South and southeasterlies for the Panhandle and very light winds for the interior. So turbulence then, we would expect some chop across southern southeast in the Dixon entrance, around Prince William Sound and across the northern Gulf below 8,000 feet. Occasional moderate certainly possible west of the Alaska Range, and then easing out a little bit as you get into Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula with light to isolated moderate there below 5,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest, Clint Weiss, is the Alaska Region Flight Standards Division Manager for the FAA. Clint came to Alaska as a young man, and his flying career, quite frankly, is remarkable, having amassed more than 16,000 hours flying everything from gliders to Twin Otters to Learjets. After flying for Mark Air for a while, Clint joined the FAA in 1998 and is now in his 19th year with them. Clint, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Harry. Good to be here.
Talking about some of the aircraft you were flown, you caught my attention the other day when we were talking on the phone about an F-16 and a red flag exercise. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, well, Harry, that was quite an honor to be able to ride along with the men and women of the United States Air Force on that important mission. It wasn't just go out and get an F-16, to be honest with you. It was a whole day of workup, not only understanding how to use a parachute, get in and out of the aircraft, work with the medical folks because you're operating in a high G environment. And so that places additional stress on your body. The briefings and preparation, just to watch everybody do that, to be prepared to go out. 70 aircraft in the sky. You're obviously running there's a combat exercise going on, and then there was air-to-air refueling, which was exciting just to be part of that. And so I really want to thank the folks from the 354th Operational Support Squadron at Eielson Air Force Base, along with the 18th Fighter Squadron there, the aggressors. That was really a wonderful experience.
So the Blue Foxes, right? 18th?
Yep.
I flew with them many years ago in the A-10, so fond place in my heart for them. So what do you think of air refueling?
That was one of the neatest experiences I've ever encountered flying. I mean, essentially you're in formation to watch that tanker boom slide across the top of the canopy, and then we refuel, and it was a beautiful day. We actually came off high and to the right of the KC-135, and if I'd have had a camera with me, I could have taken an awesome picture of other aircraft that were getting refueled and the tanker there. It was just a wonderful experience.
You know, I wish we could do more of that, because it sure does give you a new perspective on the Air Force, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. These are true patriots. I mean, you understand why the commitment they make help keep our country safe and strong, and so it was a humbling experience to be with them.
That's great. So let's talk about your current job and give our audience an indication what your job entails.
Well, as a Flight Standards Division Manager, I have 180 plus employees in the Alaska region. We have 4 general aviation field offices, and then one Air Carrier 121 Certificate Management Office. And then we have the regional office. Our job as Flight Standards is we're a standard setting organization. We're responsible for the certification, surveillance, oversight of airmen and air carriers in the National Airspace System. And with the advent of Part 107, we also now have the responsibility of oversight for what we call drones nowadays.
You mentioned you have 4 offices. Are those regional offices?
No, they're what they call Flight Standards District Offices, or FSDOs. You know,
so is that Fairbanks,
Yeah,
Anchorage,
Fairbanks,
Juneau?
You have Juneau, and then you have the Anchorage FSDO. And then here, a couple of years back, we created the Polaris, what we call Certificate Management Office, and they really work with our large Part 135 commuter air carriers.
Okay. Well, I know that you and I share the same goal as far as a safety foundation in saving lives and reducing particularly fatal and serious injury accidents. That's the goal of the Safety Foundation, and at the end of the day, the goal of the FAA as well. Talking about that, what about that goal, reducing accidents, reducing FSI accidents, what concerns you the most?
Well, we're always looking at emerging risk out there, trends within the industry, and then we as we see those, and we try to address them. And one of the most concerning ones here, it was about toward the tail end of FY15 and FY16, we saw a trend emerging with controlled flight into terrain events occurring. And
let me do this, Clint. I want to spend a whole session on CFIT accidents. We're just about running out of time. Can I get you back to, and next time we'll talk specifically about CFIT?
You bet, absolutely.
Thanks for being on the program tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry we've run out of time, but please tune in next time, and we're going to talk about something that's very concerning and understood, or certainly known by pilots out there in Alaska, and that's CFIT. So tune in next time. In the meantime, fly safe.
Thanks, Harry. See you on Friday. Here's a look at today's sea ice edge. And just a few weeks ago, we were talking about the possibility of this flash freezing. And if the winds would lay down, that would probably be the case. But that's not the case today. There's been so much wind and warmth up here that we're only talking about very scant amounts of ice right now across the North Slope. And even the thin area of blue that you see across the northern coast around the Beaufort Sea, even that, it doesn't have very high concentrations of ice. But there is ice there. So changes to come, but not so many changes just yet. Weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for the very latest there. Here's a look at southeast. You can see northerlies working down the inner waters there. Northeasterlies moving across Stevens Passage around 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. Southeasterlies coming up Clarence Strait 25 with a 6-foot sea. And across the outer coast, south and southeasterlies working up there for 30 to 35 knots or so. Seas ranging from 13 to 17 feet. So a little bit rough on the outside. As you get into Wednesday, northerlies continue through the Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, and then once you get into the south, southeasterlies 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, generally 4-foot seas on the inside, and then a south and easterly flow diminishing somewhat, 20 to 25. You can see the outer coast seas also coming down, 10 to 12-foot seas from north to south, respectively. Here's a look at south central easterlies inside of Prince William Sound, a 30-knot wind with 7-foot seas. A little bit further into the Gulf you go, and 35 knots and 10 to 13-foot seas is what you'll see. More of a light and variable wind around Shelikof Strait. And east of Kodiak Island, 10 knots there with a northeasterly wind still going strong through Cook Inlet from north to south all the way west to the Barrens, 25 knots with a 6 to 7-foot sea there. Now for Wednesday, seas and winds diminish across Cook Inlet. Northerlies across the northern end, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Easterlies inside of Shelikof Strait blowing at 20. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 4-foot seas there, 6 to 7-foot seas across the north and western Gulf. And southerlies come up east of Kodiak Island, 20 knots with a 9-foot sea. Inside Bristol Bay, 15 knots with a 6-foot sea. And southeasterlies there, southwesterlies from Castle Cape to Chignik at 15 knots. And westerlies working across the Alaska Peninsula, 30 knots with a 14 to 16-foot sea, higher seas in the Pacific. As you get into Wednesday, look for a light southeasterly wind inside of inside of Bristol Bay with a 4-foot sea. Southwesterlies around the Bering Sea coast, 20 knots with an 11-foot sea and a 10 to 11-foot sea across the Pacific coast, 15 to as high as 25 knots as you get to Sand Point and King Cove and further southward along the peninsula. For the Aleutians, west and northwesterlies will rule the day for the chain. Look for 30 knots in just about, well, it looks like all areas. 18 to 19-foot seas there from Nikolsky to Unalaska, 17 to 19-foot seas on the Pacific coast, and 17 to 18-foot seas in the west. You'll see very little change as you get into Wednesday, 20 to 30 knots in most areas, 13 to 16-foot seas across the Pacific coast, and 13 to 16-foot seas across the Bering Sea. Across the west, 14-foot seas are expected on that westerly wind at 30 knots on Wednesday. For the west coast, easterlies blowing across St. Lawrence Island and the northern Bering at 35 with a 12-foot sea. Look for westerlies working across the St. Paul and St. George areas, 17-foot seas expected there, and southerlies coming up the west coast of the YK Delta, 30 knots in some areas north of Nunivak Island. 10-foot seas are expected there on Tuesday. That'll shift a little bit more to a southwesterly flow on Wednesday with a 7-foot sea. We'll keep southerlies outside of the Kuskokwim Delta. Westerlies continue for the Pribilofs, and southwesterlies a little bit stronger west of St. Matthew with a 12-foot sea on 25 knots. Across the North Slope now, easterlies working across the Beaufort Sea, 15 to 20 with 8-foot seas there, 9-foot seas around Point Barrow, and then northeasterlies working down the Chukchi Seacoast, 15 to 20 with an easterly wind outside of Kotzebue Sound. That should diminish, but winds may come up a little bit more for the Beaufort Seacoast for Wednesday. 7 to 9-foot seas there, 25 knots from the east, and a little bit of a stronger wind off of Wainwright, 30 knots with a 9-foot sea for Wednesday. Recapping tonight's weather across the interior, things look pretty quiet and dry. Rain will start to creep into central and southern parts of southeast, and a big storm out across the central and northern Bering will gradually fill in as we go into Tuesday and Wednesday, the first couple days of November. Periods of light rain will start to move into central and southern southeast as we get into Wednesday, with colder air trying to work its way into the North Slope as we get into November the 2nd. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.